In this exercise, let's add a spaceship to our game's background. If we return to our Layers panel, we can create a new layer that's on top of our planet and cosmic dust layers, and let's call this one the Spaceship layer. Again, I'm going to turn off my example and make sure everything else is locked down so we don't accidentally work on that one. Additionally, I'm going to work off to the edge and then drag on my artwork later. You should have already downloaded the folder from our Moodle page that has 3 different spaceships to pick and choose from. You only have to do one of these for your exercise, and whichever one you want to choose is up to you. I'm going to work with Spaceship 2 and drag it into our Illustrator document and place it right there. The first thing we want to do is to image trace this so that it recognizes all of the outlines and inner areas. With our image selected, go up to the very top and choose Image Trace. Say OK to this warning. And by default, the image I've given you should be too light for it to automatically pick up. So we need to click on the Image Trace options, and then let's increase the threshold until we can see our artwork. That looks good. Additionally, under the More or Advanced options, choose Ignore White to turn off the white area that's inside of it. Remember, the last thing we need to do when we image trace something is click on the Expand button at the very top to turn it into the regular vector outline so we can see all of the different points. Now, in order to quickly colorize this, we're going to use a new tool called the Live Paint Bucket tool. You can find this tool hiding under the Shape Builder tool, and it looks like this. And whenever you have your artwork selected and you roll over it, you can see how it highlights that particular work. Right now, it's your typical vector artwork. I'm going to choose a color in my color palette. Later on, I can go back and change up whatever colors I want. But with one click, you can see it recognizes those inner areas and will fill them in. Now, as I hover over the different parts, you can see it recognizes each of the different shapes, and whenever I click, it will fill in those shapes. What we want to do is to fill this in with whatever colors that you feel fit. So let's see, we'll go up to the very top. Your colors can be different from what I have mine. They don't have to follow the exact pattern that I have. And later on, we're going to go in and change up the details for each of the colors as well. Just making sure everything has some form of color or design to it. Now, as with live tracing, if I was to choose my Move tool and to click on it, I can scale it and move it around, but I can't use my Direct Selection tool to click on the individual parts. In other words, if I want to further edit or refine this, I also need to expand it. So once you've finished filling in your entire object, click on the Expand button at the very top, and this will break it apart into its separate vector shapes. We can then go to Object and Ungroup. You may have to do it multiple times so that now you can click on the individual shape and drag it apart. For the remainder of this drawing, all of our forms need to have some sort of highlight and shadow area to give it a 3-dimensional and complete detailed look. And there's several different techniques we can do to achieve that in our artwork. I'm going to give you some ideas that you can try for yours, but however you want to design your own is left up to you. One thing to think about is how we created the buttons in the first exercise for this unit. Each of those buttons had a variety of different overlays, either using gradients, or we drew in specific highlights and shadows and applied those to that particular shape. The same thing can be done for this artwork. Let's start off with the window. I'm going to select this topmost window, and instead of having a solid blue, I'm going to give it a gradation of blue. I'll start off with just a basic gradient, then open up my gradient panel. I'll make it radial, and instead of going white to black, of course, I want to open up one of my color swatches, and let's turn it from white, or at least a blue, to another solid blue. Remember, with the gradient, you also have a gradient tool. You can click and drag and reposition and restate where you want that gradient to be. To further refine this, let's add some highlights and some shadows to the glassy surface. The easiest way to draw off some of these highlights and shadows could be with your pencil tool. With the pencil tool selected, I can load up maybe white as my fill color, and I'm just going to easily drag in and kind of rough out where I want a highlight to be. It doesn't have to be perfect. One thing about working with highlights and shadows, especially for reflections, is that you can make up the overall shape. As long as it fits the contours of what you're working with, then it will look nice and artistic. Along with this, I can choose my object. Let's go up to Effect, and if I wanted to feather the edge of this one, we'll go down to Stylize and choose Feather. When I turn on Preview, I get an idea of what it looks like, and if I increase it or decrease it, we'll make it more or less feathered. The final thing I can do is remember to change up our blending mode. To do this, we'll open our Transparency panel, and with Transparency we can change it from normal to something like Overlay or to Screen, or even just dropping the opacity could be enough to blend it in a little bit better. That's looking pretty good. Let's also add some shadows to the opposite side. If I want my shadows to fit the contour a little bit better, then this is where maybe having my Ellipse Tool or my Shapes tool will come in handy. I'll draw off a perfect circle. Let's make it dark so I can see what I'm working with. On top of it, I'm going to hold down my Option key and make a copy of that circle. I'll change the color so we can see this one. Now, in order to keep this crescent moon shape, I'm going to select both of them. With both circles selected, this is where I can use my Shape Builder tool. Hold down the Option key and then click away the part that I want to get rid of. This will leave me with that nice crescent circular shape. From there, I can start choosing a different color and maybe changing up my blending mode to go to multiply that in. Using a variety of different techniques, you can see how you get some good results for each. From here, all I have to do is to click on my artwork and refocus it to fit the needs of my design. Remember, if you ever need to copy a design from one area to the other, let's do the same for this second bubble down here. I'll select the blue area. I'm going to choose my eyedropper tool, and one click inside of here will pick up that same gradient. It's simply a matter of choosing my gradient tool and repositioning the highlight point right there. Then all I've got to do is make a copy of my highlight, and I can scale it down since it's the same shape, just slightly smaller. And we can do the same thing for the shadow shape. Whoops, didn't hold down Option. Scale it down to fit the area that we want inside of here. Now, if you have a very complex shape, like the red area of my spaceship, let's say I wanted to grab my pencil tool and draw a highlight that fell in this particular area. Now, I only want it to show up on the red area and not where the little window is. In order to clip this out, it would be very difficult having to go back and reselect the two objects and cutting it away, and then even if I wanted to make changes, I couldn't move it around. I'd have to redraw the whole thing. Here's how I would approach that sort of object. I'm going to make a copy of the red area and work on my copy for now. I'm going to treat this as if I'm just drawing on top of it, so let's add a nice highlight to it. Maybe I'll get an orange area. I'll draw off something that looks like this, and then maybe on top of it it's even got a white little highlight sticking up right there. Or let's have it follow the contour of my design. As with the other ones, I'll add a simple feather to it. Maybe this one will be a little bit less, and I'll even feather out, or let's add a gradient to this one. So for this guy, we'll add a gradient. Swap those colors over to orange. It's kind of neat in itself. Make it more linear. Then change that up. Now when I apply my feather, it looks something like that. Let's do the same thing and add some shadows to this side. I'll grab my pencil tool. For my shadows, I want that to be a darker red. So I can click and drag and give a basic outline, and I'm overdrawing the area that is necessary. In other words, I want this whole area to be red. That red needs to be darker. And so we'll give it something like this. Oops, I didn't have it selected. Or if necessary, I could give it a gradient. Let's give a gradient to the overall shape if necessary. We'll stick with this. Again, if I needed to, I could multiply this and give more of a transition. And then if I needed to feather the edge of it, I can let it fade from one color to the other. Is much better. Okay. It looks like I have a mess of things right now, but here's the magic part. Because I'm working with a copy of it, I can select my shape that I want fitted into it. I'm going to place this one on top. So I'm going to bring it to the front. Go to Object, bring it to the front. Once this object is on top of everything, I can then select all of the artwork that's within it and create a clipping mask. Go back up to Object, down to Clipping Mask, and Make. And you can see it now masks off all of my highlights and shadow areas. Then it's simply a matter of dragging this till it fits nicely on top of my overall area. Now I've got my highlights and shadows added to the area I want to work with. If I need to go in and make adjustments or changes, all I have to do is double click on it. This will go into isolation mode, and then I can select whatever shape that I want and be able to change it up without having to readjust any of my clipping or drawing that it's done. Once I'm finished, double click, and there I've got that particular one. So going through this entire process, take it one step at a time. Yours doesn't have to be as detailed or have feathered edges for everything. Say if I wanted this very top piece to look a little bit more cartoonish, maybe I would go in and let's just choose a lighter color and draw off a simple highlight, and then we'll come over to this edge and we'll drag off a simple shadow space. But each part of it does need to have some form of highlights and shadows. Remember, once you've got a drawing, in this case, I'm going to merge both of those together using my Shape Builder tool. And in order to clip away the edge that's unwanted, select your shadow and the object we're working with. Then when you use your Shape Builder, hold down the Option key to remove that edge, and now you're left with something that looks like this. Both of these are acceptable forms. You can still go in, if necessary, and add gradients to add further refinement to it. But I want every piece of your spaceship to have some form of highlight and shadow area. No flat colors whatsoever for your design. Once you get a design that you like, select the entire object, your whole spaceship, go up to Object, and let's group it together. Now we can place it within our design. So I want to move it over. Now I will be adding some text behind this, so I don't know the final placement for now, but this will give me at least a good idea of where I can put my spaceship and what I can do with it. Some other things you may want to add to your design to help the overall composition, instead of having it just sitting in space, let's add some little jet propulsion things to this. We could easily do this by drawing off some rounded ellipses, and let's turn those into some radial style designs. That looks good. And maybe this last gradient we'll drop the opacity down to 0%. So now it actually gets opaque as it's going outward. From here, we can take this and squash it. If I turned it one way, it could be shooting out this way. Maybe instead of a purple flame, we'll give it more of a reddish flame. And even drop the opacity of this a little further. I'm going to stick that behind there and make several copies of them. We're left with a design that looks something like this. Whatever's best for you. Once you finish this up, remember we're going to add on to this background design with one more exercise. So let's go to File and save what we have, and then continue on to the final exercise. We won't turn this in just yet.